There's a lot of hype around 5G, but there's also a lot of reality to come. Cisco predicts less than 2% of traffic, data traffic will be carried on 5G by 2020. But after that, there's a huge hockey stick of growth in terms of what it accomplishes. Wireless networks are the great enabler. We've been on a steady evolution, and in fact, 4G, we utilize the term long-term evolution. So 4G is carrying the bulk of the load for the next few years, but there's going to be a steady transition to 5G. Building 5G is going to take a lot of collaboration between cities, between municipalities, between the OEMs, the carriers, engineering firms. It's also going to take collaboration with transportation departments and other key, Building 5G is going to take a lot of collaboration between the carriers, the equipment manufacturers, engineering, but it's also going to take a lot of cooperation with cities and transportation departments, with police departments and fire departments. New evolutions in network like FirstNet are going to enable public safety, but it takes a cooperative environment. So I think a lot's got to be done in terms of education, and WIA has done a tremendous job of bringing together that entire ecosystem. "5G is an ecosystem. It takes the carriers who will supply network. It'll take private network provider. Building 5G is still never mind. Building 5G will be a steady evolution from 4G. Just like we moved from 3G to 4G and we called it long-term evolution, we're more or less in a 4.5, if you would, G, which will last us the next couple of years, and then we'll see a transition into 5G and a large hockey stick in terms of growth on those networks. 5G networks will be a blend of technology. It's called a HETnet, or a heterogeneous network, meaning it'll utilize a number of different network technologies like Internet of Things, low-power wireless networks. You'll have 5G is going to be a blend of a number of network types. Cellular will be probably the dominant technology, but you're going to see increased use of Bluetooth, low-powered wide area networks. You're going to see networks like Sigfox and Comcast Machine Q, specialized purpose-built networks that will solve the billions and trillions of connections that the Internet of Things and getting to smart will take.
Years now. It started through a number of different means, and there's a whole history to it. If you've got specific questions or direction you want me to head, let me know, but I'm going to keep this short and then we'll get to the panel. So where we like to start off is, I should back up. You'll hear a lot of different definitions about smart city, and I think a lot of times what happens is people end up focusing on either the vertical that they are playing in, or they focus on one or two specific applications of smart city technology and say, ta-da, it's a smart city. If you back it up and you really think about what a city is in the business of doing, and cities, government, states, everything have a core purpose. Cities are in the business of creating an environment in which their residents and their visitors can thrive. That's fundamentally it. They do that through policy, they do that through economic development, through a number of different means, supplying of utilities. And to Peter's point, historically, 1,000 years ago, that meant have great walls, right? Because it kept the danger out. 100 years ago, it meant start paving your roads so that transportation can move in and out. What we're seeing now is a shift with the digital economy and the digital technology. Cities, in order to be competitive, just like you said, you know Amazon's got a list of criteria it's looking for. We're all trying to figure out that secret mix. Cities are inevitably going to be moving towards creating an environment in which the digital information can flow well, be that through the communication layers and a lot of other things. So we're going to talk about that for just a second. So like I said, we started this about 2 years ago, and we have a portfolio at this point in time of over, I want to say over 45. We're in the process of rationalizing it, projects that go everywhere from proof of concept research all the way to fully recognized return on value. So it's a completely fleshed out portfolio, which is one of the things that's exciting. I throw this up here because a lot of times we jump straight to the solution and we don't have any context to talk about it. When you look at the different ways that we can improve that environment, the city, there's everything from getting the fundamentals right all the way up to emerging markets. And so everyone tends to gravitate towards the area that feels great for them. And this isn't specific to cities, in fact. Kudos to Infotech. This is just a conversation about at what layer of the business are you trying to improve things. For a city that doesn't crash, maybe your streetlights aren't even operating, right? You've got potholes so bad you can't drive down. All the way up to the top level, creating new industries. Are we the place where we're birthing fintech or transportation tech or wireless innovations, whatever it might be, right? In the city, we're making improvements in all of these areas. Again, I won't have time to go through the full portfolio, but hopefully based on the panel and the conversations, we can talk about that. The next thing I want to put into context, so it's just a smidge out of focus. There we go. Not that you can read it if you're beyond the first row. This is a chart that I like to use to help people understand what business the city's in. If you look at this dartboard, each one of these wedges represents a line of business fundamentally that the city's in. Public safety, health, education, jobs, law enforcement, aviation, street repair, parks and recreation. It goes around the wheel. And when we talk about the improvements that we're making in Smart City or the opportunities in Smart City, what it really boils down to, if you get to the fundamental equation, is there's a technology and there's a new solution, typically coming out of the private sector. Sometimes it comes out of research. We've got a fantastic relationship with Georgia Tech. We're doing a lot of research, specifically around Smart City. We might be able to talk about that a little bit later. But a solution presents itself, or a potential solution presents itself. Success isn't just having that technology or that communication capability in your hand. Anybody that's in sales knows that's not the end of the game. You have to find the person at the other end that's going to buy that solution. It's going to write a check, implement it, operate it, and maintain it, right? That's the essence of success. This effectively represents the potential customers that a city has. And within each one of these departments, there's multitudes of challenges, problems, opportunities. Go back to this slide. Some of them just want to get things fixed. Some of them want to invent new markets and everything in between. So what we're seeing is with our rush in Smart City, or our program in Smart City, is we're trying to bridge that chasm between the private sector that's got new technologies, new innovations coming out, and government that has problems, but to Peter's point, doesn't know how to apply that technology to solve that problem. And historically, as government, we're not great at articulating the precise nature of our problem, right? If I say, make public safety better, what does that mean? If I asked everybody in this room, you probably all have a different perspective on what does making public safety mean. You know, I pick one person, they say, well, reduce crime. Okay, what does that mean? You're talking about petty theft, grand theft auto? Are you talking about murders? Are you talking about embezzlement? What are you talking about, right? So within each one of these, there's hundreds and hundreds of opportunities. And the opportunity / challenge is connecting those opportunities with the technology, which is what we've been doing. Now, this is probably the most important slide. Again, hard to read. But it effectively combines a lot of what we're talking about here. I think of this as the entire supply chain of Smart City, no matter what the focus is. These up here, I think you were calling them verticals. These are the verticals that the city's primarily focused on. So we call it mobility, transportation, right, making things flow better. Public safety, environmental sustainability, city operational efficiency, and public and business engagement. And the reality is there's a few verticals you won't see up here. For example, health, because typically, and the city of Atlanta is no exception to that, typically cities don't focus primarily on health. That may be at a county level, it may be at a state level, there's various institutions. You don't see education up here, right? You don't see real estate. It's not to say that those aren't important, it's just the priorities and the focus the city has. But you'll notice something, at this level here, where you've got your purpose, the reason you're doing things, the thing you're trying to improve, it splits out. Down here at the bottom layer, you've got your devices. And again, this is typical, but effectively it applies to every smart city project we've come across, which is there's some means of collecting information, be it an IoT device, be it an existing system that we already have. We have to communicate it either amongst themselves if it's out in the field or back to a central location. We then collect the data that's gathered from that. We then do an analysis, which is where a lot of the most progressive pieces are happening right here. And then finally, whatever that analysis results in, we have an application layer that says, do we present that? Is it a report? Is it a HoloLens projection? Is it a mobile app? What is it, right? And I know that's very generic, but the reality is this is the model that we figured out for each one of our projects. So we could take, for example, one of the projects it has, and this is very telling of any project in our portfolio. But this one I like because it has a wonderful tangible ROI on it, right? So the city deployed 90,000 trash bins, like you have at your house, you know, the blue or green bins, right? Embedded in each one of those is a little RFID tag. So we know precisely the serial number and where that bin's located. And then every day when the trash trucks or the waste recycling comes around, it tips that bin. There's a reader on the truck. We're still down here at the device layer. In fact, this case, it is within solid waste. There's one department that owns it. So if you go back here, you're going to find that department. Where'd it go? Public Works, right there. This one department had this one problem. So they put it in the trash truck, detects it, notes the location, the time, dips it in. That information then is aggregated on the truck. When the truck pulls back into the yard at night, it uploads that through a Wi-Fi connection, dumps into, actually in that case, it transmits out to the vendor's cloud database. So the cloud, the information is aggregated at the cloud layer. An analysis is run on it, which says how many people put their recycling bins out last night. How much have the recycling bins moved? Do we have a recycling bin theft issue? Do we have these sorts of things? And then finally, the application layer is how it gets consumed. And the intent is for environmental sustainability. Hopefully everybody followed me so far, right? This was a typical example of one of the projects we did. We've come to full fruition, but it's really interesting because it gets into pieces everywhere in here, the challenges that we have to make work so that this data flows on a daily basis. The original intent of this was to figure out how many recycling bins are being put out and what's the recycling participation rate. So which neighborhoods are recycling well, which neighborhoods aren't. And this was a great way to do it. In the process, we've run into challenges with maintaining this technology on a trash truck because they don't operate in the most polite environments. We've had challenges in getting the data normalized so that we could track the bins appropriately here. We've had significant analysis issues here with some of the data getting corrupted and bad processes internally. But in the process, we figured out something really, really interesting, which is really where we want to go, and this is how I'm going to lead, and then we can take the next step, which is we set out to accomplish one mission to determine what was the participation rate of recycling bins. We did that. We figured out every night which neighborhoods are doing it. But there was another team within, in fact, it was John R. Seidel's team in sustainability, that asked a different question. It said, what's happening with that waste that we're taking? And they weren't setting out to find a problem, but they ended up discovering it because they had access to all this information flowing through the city. And what they learned, the ROI, if you will, is that every night or every day they would watch a certain truck, they use the same trucks for solid waste and recycling, by the way. That's one of the keys to the story. Every day the truck would go around and pick up its recycling, and they knew it was recycling because of the RFID tags on the bins. They knew precisely where it was, who was participating. And then they would watch that truck not go to the recycling dump, but they saw it going to the waste dump, right? Now, there's a lot of reasons, and we're not passing judgment on that. It could have been contaminated waste, it could have been a number of different things. But they discovered in that process, and they watched the pattern, they realized that there was a huge missed opportunity. we get paid for every ton of recycling that we take to recycling. We have to pay for every ton of solid waste that we put into a landfill. So there's your ROI, right? So we're working internally on, hey, what's the root cause of that? How do we lower that cost? And you may not think government's sexy, but I love that story because it wasn't just we deployed these sensors and there's 12 of them, isn't this interesting? We have 90,000 trash bins or recycling bins across the city. So you're getting into big data numbers, right? We have millions of records of where were these trash bins. And that was one of those things once we got up into the application layer, once all these layers settled down, we could start to get value that wasn't originally intended. And that's where I want to leave the story, because smart city to me is not just about deploying new technologies to solve old problems and new problems. It's about figuring out what is the most efficient distribution of technology that will allow us to solve the biggest number of problems, right? So one deployment of that system actually benefits multiple departments and multiple groups. That's really where we're at in our journey. So I say journey, it's an ongoing process. Like I said, didn't have time to go through the other 39 projects in the portfolio, but going back to this slide, it truly is representative of the entire city. There's something in just about every area. And as I pointed out here, we definitely have multiple mobility. We're probably going to end up talking about North Avenue, I'm sure. Public safety, environmental sustainability, operational efficiency, and public and business engagement. So, I guess I'll leave it at that piece.
Well, let me ask you while you're still there on the, since we talked about waste, how does the Big Belly, and how does that factor in?
So Big Belly, for those that aren't aware, is a solar-powered trash can. I think we have about 160 of them set about, and they're street level, so they're commercial grade, the kind you see when you're walking up and down the street on the sidewalk. They're not residential. That piece factors in because our intent was, it's really twofold, again being smart. The first one was we didn't want to have to send someone out to empty that trash can if it's not full. The bins will tell us when they fill up so we can adjust our routes and only send people out when necessary. That was one thing. And we, just like the private sector, like to at least offset costs if not make money. With the Big Belly project, we were able to solve that problem, but we were also able to generate ad revenue, which ends up paying for the trash cans. So effectively it becomes free trash cans that reduces the cost of servicing them. Gives better service, gives a better quality of life, hopefully. I'm not sure if there were some specifics, but
No, it reduces the number of truck rolls as well, right?
it reduces the number of truck rolls.
Which
And
then
one of the
plays
things,
into the transportation, right?
well, it plays into environmental sustainability, it plays into city operational efficiency. How do we reduce the cost of running a city? Or conversely, how do we deliver more city for the same cost? Because as the city's growing, and there's projections of, I think it's like 2 million people, no. Yeah, 2 million people in the next so many years.
In fact, as we start to bring new sets of data to life in each category,
districts and how to build on them and use them to their fullest extent. But we also know there's a lot of opportunities in using this data and how we can build on it and capitalize and leverage their use. So with this panel, this is Dan Garofalo. He's the University of Pennsylvania's first environmental sustainability director.
That we can store energy on campus. We have like an ice tank for cooling, where we can, if we know we're going to have hot temperatures coming up, we can overcool an ice tank, and then during the
Someone buys into my deal with my dog, to take a grain of salt here. It's about, somebody had mentioned earlier, it's about efficiency. So the efficiency of data and optimization of that data. So how do you use those two things in order to make more informed decisions at the property level? And so those buildings are, for the most part, other than Penn and Drexel, for the most part, they're all owned by different people. And they come to the table, or they come to the party with different understandings, different predilections, and different knowledge base needs. And they have their own prejudices as to what works in their building or not. And so the question is, how do we create data, and then how do we use it, no big surprise, to make better decisions at the property level? And so, big surprise, that's not really happening yet. So despite what Dan's saying, at the commercial property level, for all intents and purposes, we got some smart people. We have some good legislation that requires us, as somebody had mentioned earlier, I think it was Joyce, to monitor and measure. So in 25 cities in the country, in 2 states, California and Washington, in 8 other states on public buildings, and in 2 counties.
And got the opportunity to really frost amongst all the businesses of GE, which there's too many to name. And you know, I'm really excited to be here because since 2010, I've been focused on digital, and had the opportunity to focus on digital in the industrial side, and sensors like pH and ORP and conductivity that would sense the water attributes and understanding, you know, how the quality of that water for performance. You know, gets automized. So you have sensors that come in, you have controllers, and you have alarms and alerts, and that's great. But you still have to be at the site, and you have to catch those systems. And you have to catch what's going on in that data at the time of which that data has that, or that system has an issue. So we had all that data sat in a box, and most of the times, by the way, today, it still sits in that box. Or I'll relate it back to the water, it sits in that meter, because many of the meters actually hold data today inside. But the next step that we started to take was, how do you connect those devices? And I think that that's probably the first step for people to start to think about. Once they plan their vision, take those steps of what type of data do you need? What's the most fundamental, basic data, the ones that you already have, the ones that you probably don't need to invest a lot of capital in installing or doing much work to get it going. But get that data connected to where you can get to smart people that can start to analyze and draw insights from that data. So
it's totally a vision.
Good night.
Oh, as I just said, it was, how do you get that data? How do you get people from that data? Actually, the Department of Energy has that most of the waste of energy happens on buildings 50,000 square feet and below. Why? Because people cannot afford this very sophisticated type of SCADA systems, if you will, which in the end they are not very sophisticated. They still rely on very old technology, but the fact of the matter is that they are very, very expensive. So people cannot actually acquire them. This individual owner that has a building, 5-floor building across the street, and so on. So data acquisition is actually very hard to be done because it's expensive using existing technology. This is what Internet of Things actually is trying to do right now. This is what it's going to do. From one point of view, to actually incorporate existing systems into the cloud, but more importantly, to trigger innovation. So to decentralize this monitoring. So devices that will be just good enough to collect the data and bring only part of that necessary data to the cloud so further analysis can be done. So Internet of Things is the middle man essentially between data acquisition and artificial intelligence. So this way, not people making the decisions, but you train the system to be adaptable. So this way, it can make the decisions for you. And that can happen, much faster than any of us. Okay. So the electronics, what we have been doing all this from the field all the way to the end user. Now, that's fantastic, but the thing is, you hear a lot about IoT these days. One of the biggest threat for homeland security is cyber attacks. So many people for a long time now, they've been trying to put things on the cloud. But security was not an issue, was not something that was taken into serious consideration. Why? Because back in the 90s, cyber attacks was not, a main topic of discussion. So as a result, a lot of the systems that are now on the field, existing infrastructure that reports somehow back to the cloud, it was actually, they made a retrofit to that. But security has not been taken into serious consideration. So what we
There's not enough fresh air intake. That's relevant. Yet most of the tenants in the office buildings in Philly and elsewhere.
Everything on there. Bad thing because you can't track people, but data cannot track me wherever I am because my wife can track. So here's where I work in. Everything that's built. So we're talking about data management, and sustainability, right? I was involved back in 2008 and 9 in a project called Mazda in Abu Dhabi. Folks have heard about that. But we heard from Charles in the morning, there's no money for it. And the reason there's no money, technology is changing every 3 years. By the time you plan it, design it, build it, technology is obsolete. Okay? So sustain, if you ask me today what is smart cities, I call it's sustainability on steroids. So we have taken the next step. We could take everything out, what we could do in sustainable solutions for conservation, efficiencies, but now we are doing IoT-enabled solution and using that data, that enriched data to make a smart decision. We can do that with anything that's with the roof and wall, anything with the landscapes, green infrastructure, anything that moves people, material, energy across the place, and everything that is working. So that data comes in. So what I'm going to talk about is how some examples of what that data is used for. And then I'm going to conclude on a couple things which probably I have not heard. So they are collecting data. Is that data of any help? If you just look at an internet moment today, 2017, this is what is collected. Okay, this is what we are collecting. So 90% of real time and all the data that we collected is coming in the last 2 years. Do we really know what? You can see there's a conduction, waste can reroute you to different neighborhoods. So the data is really helpful, but at the end of the day, it's helping the people that are using it, right? So how do you extract intelligence of the data that you collect? So today, if I put in sensors on that pavement and for a pothole, which happens because of freezing and thawing, it's not going to happen every day. So if I put a sensor there collecting data every day, it's not worth it. So you need to understand when to install the sensor, what is the need for it, and what are you trying to obtain for it. And what I'm seeing, working on projects, because I'm working on projects globally, that vision, that roadmap is not being created. And I see Philadelphia is creating that roadmap to become a smart city. And I think that is the foundation to realize what's your outcome, what are you looking at? Are you being a smart city like Las Vegas? Or is it Philadelphia? Is it Disney in Orlando? That's what you need to understand and get into. So at the end of the day, it helps in triple bottom line. The smart cities, if you look at it, it helps the people, it helps in environmental sustainability by reducing congestion and CO2 carbon footprint, and it economically helps you because you don't have cars idling and just burning gas sitting on the road. Same can be said on waste. I guess Rubicon was there this morning, right? When should I send my pickup truck to go and collect recycle in street 1 versus street 50? If I know the garbage cans are full, because there's a sensor there telling me what the levels are, I can reroute my fleet vehicles. That way I can reduce the consumption of fuel, at the same time bring efficiency to the system. The list that go on, and it goes on in every, McKinsey just came out in a report that was just talking about remote management for transportation, oil, gas, utilities. And as you can see, there's an efficiency that you're getting in all of it. But one critical point that I need to make and that I've not heard, it's all about people. Okay, this data, this city of Philadelphia, make it smart, and there's not a single human being in here, I don't think it's smart. So the one thing that when we design the city, you need to understand what are the citizens asking for. And I think Charles gave an excellent example this morning. He said, if I go to the poor neighborhoods, the data they're looking for is safety and security. If I go to the rich neighborhood, they're looking for parking. You know, so you need to understand your cities, your neighborhood, and understand and develop solutions based on that. So the journey is endless. On the data side, the journey is endless. I bought shoes about a couple of months back. I go on my LinkedIn and Facebook, there's the shoe ad. Come on, I'm done buying for the next 6 months. I'll buy them there. But that's how people in the retail industry is tracking it out. They know where you are, what you buy. You drink from Starbucks, you walk by Starbucks, your iPhone will bring you the coupon. So the people are using, some of them is used wisely, some of them is abused. So that network you're putting in, and you get multiple other use cases of it. And which is exactly what you're trying to do, right? You're not just blocking, no, I'm just going to be siloed and I'm going to do it myself. That's not the way to do it in the future. It has to be inclusive, it has to take all citizens, and I think Charles touched on that this morning. If you build a smart city, you have to look at all citizens and all need. It has to be competitive. Philadelphia, I just heard, is trying to attract Amazon, so is Atlanta, and so is other places, right? I was just in Atlanta last week.
A couple of thoughts brought up where it's about the people, and maybe it addresses a general question that a lot of people might have is, you know, where do you start? These are all great ideas, but how does an entity or place get started in this? And if you talk about the people, who should you involve in strategic planning? Is it the leadership? Is it technology people? Is it both? Where do you start with that?
The way we are finding out is both of that as well as NGOs and the citizens. So you need to get the citizens, because if you don't engage the citizens and you just engage, the utilities and other people that are in there, when you go and install things in the market, always at the end of the day, go to the outcome. What is the outcome you're looking for? Is it safety, security? Is it something else? Once you have that defined, then get it right.
Yeah, I think I'll be spot on. She's not here, she had a dash somewhere, but there's a young lady who created an app, Morgan Berman. The app's called Milk Crate, My Milk Crate. And essentially what it does is it tracks human behaviors on any number of factors. And so to the extent you want to measure corporate social responsibility or environmental social governance, she can help that app be used for behavior change, or at least tracking to enable behavior change. So for instance, Comcast is piloting that in order to measure what their employees are doing by way of wellness.
In particular, something that hasn't come up yet today, which is about the distributed ledger or blockchain infrastructure technology as an enabler to sharing some common infrastructure elements that can enable more efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. So Dubai is doing those experiments which others would not do. Abu Dhabi is doing. So blockchain, IBM Watson, and all the things are being tested and worked out in Dubai. And Dubai is looking for partners where they can work with others. I think there was a statement made by somebody on the panel. The days are gone when one can work alone and find a solution. It is all about teaming and partnership, because I think if you don't do that, you'll be left behind, and you're trying to reinvent the wheel, and the wheel is, by the way, 10 kilometers down the road, and you're still trying to figure out, what the wheel looks like. Is it square or is it circular? So both in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, what I'm finding, so IRENA, which is a renewable energy institute, which is based in now at the Masdar campus, is trying to get get the information out to the people, and let's start collaboration rather than just keeping the IP, which they want to keep for themselves.
Certainly.
Because at the end of the day, if the CIO sets the vision, which is, here's what I'm going to do on the network and connectivity, but if the water department, the transportation, the energy, and all those people don't talk to each other and talk with the vision to the mayor's office and the CIO's office, then the solutions are silent, and those silos have to be broken. And those you see are getting broken outside quicker than in US. And by the way, those silos have been broken outside by Americans rather than, the local internet. Getting like pushed aside, you are seeing changes. Let's say you're doing real-time operation of assets, doesn't matter what assets, transportation or water. You're seeing those people getting retrained in other jobs so they can do the work, and you're seeing that now happen. But that has to be a part of the charter. When you put in that system, when you're doing it, you have to retrain the workforce to manage the systems, okay? And that is very critical because you have in-depth knowledge of the system when you're running it either manually or semi-automatically, right? So you have to be a part of the solution. And that's a big discussion if you look at the smart city space. If you look at go at any conferences, it's never on the agenda. What do you do with the 50% of the workforce that might not have jobs by 2050?
We actually have that question. It's a little ahead of its time because our next panel is going to address that. So we have one last question.
So back to energy, Brad, you brought up some of the complexities involved in energy efficiency, energy services contracts. And
That dovetails with what's going to happen to inner city youth and how do we get them involved in this smart city initiative. He's taught e-commerce and technology for the competitive advantage at Temple University, and he's helped develop the entrepreneurial program at the Community College of Philadelphia. So please welcome Peter Murray, and he's going to be joined by Ellen White.
Well, hi, everybody. My name's Pete Murray. I'll read our AV done in a minute, but you've heard a bit from Ellen. I've had the pleasure of hosting an event here, the Smart City event. We call it Getting the Smart. Dense Networks are doing a program around the United States. Yesterday we were in Atlanta. The week before we were in Chicago. The week before that we were in San Francisco. We get with the IT departments and some of the constituencies, and we talk about how we get to smart. So it's been really a great journey for me, and we had a great session here with Ellen. So this is one of the drivers, right? We're all experiencing a rapid population growth. Ellen, when you see this tremendous growth here, I love looking at all these cranes. And in fact, every one of these major cities I've been in, we see a tremendous amount of growth. So, in general, the Smart City program, how are you managing the growth, and what are some of the key sectors you're focusing on?
Well, I'm not getting paid enough to manage all the growth. But one way we look at all the growth is that this is a significant amount of opportunity. And on the last panel, and I think just throughout the day, you guys have heard a lot about how we really need to engage the community. And so for us from city government, it's really important for us to be really thinking about who are these real estate developers and the movers and shakers who are dreaming up these buildings, who are dreaming out what is going to occupy these buildings, who's going to occupy these buildings. And I mentioned earlier in the panel, we have buildings like the Sting Center, which is the nanotechnology building on Penn campus, and they are the nanotechnology hub for the northeastern region. And so we have that right here in this neighborhood, and we need to be thinking about how we're going to be engaging the folks that are activating those spaces and helping us think about what does Smart City in Philadelphia look like. And so I think it's a little bit of an indirect way of answering your question, but I think that in the context of a smart city, we are very much in the phases of how are we going to get from point A to B, and who are all the people that we need to make sure that we're talking to and including in the conversation before we as city government define exactly what B looks like.
So Philadelphia, I chair a task force between the Smart City Council, which actually is Smart City Week in Washington, D.C. next week. There's a 3-day event if anybody's interested. Ellen will be there.
I will not, but two people from Charlie will be there, and our Director of Innovation will be there.
Okay, we'll tell Charlie to come by our task force meeting. But it's between the Wireless Infrastructure Association and the Smart City Council, because we see this convergence of the technologies and the networks being essential to enabling much of what we talked about already today. Philadelphia was one of the winners, received a grant from the Smart City Council, one of 5 cities, Miami, Orlando, Philadelphia, Austin, and Indianapolis for the first 5. There'll be 5 new ones next year. You have an upcoming event with the Smart City Council, and how does the city mobilize to pull all that together?
Well, I've been really busy. Yes, our event is on October 12th, and we have invited over 200 stakeholders who represent all different community groups, organizations, businesses, universities, to come together and help us, one, to learn about what is it technology and what does it mean when we talk about smart city. And so we want to be able to provide a foundational understanding of all this work that we've been talking about today. In addition to that, we also want to make sure that folks who normally do not collaborate with each other are in the same room, learning together, sharing together, and planning and thinking about what does Smart City in Philadelphia look like. And so that's the kind of conversation we want to facilitate. But over the last several months, we've done an extensive amount of stakeholder engagement. We also have someone here from Comcast, familiar face. They have been a tremendous supporter of us pursuing our road mapping and also to put this conference together. So many thanks to the Machine Q team over at Comcast. And so what it has taken is our city leadership. We have Charlie Brennan, our Chief Information Officer. We have Christine Darno Lopez, who's our Chief Administrative Officer. But then we also have folks from Water. We have Deb over here who are open to collaborating and thinking about what does this all look like, less from a vertical point of view, but from a very lateral perspective of city government really working together. And of course, we also have Mayor Kenny, who's also supporting this initiative.
You know, I was blessed enough, I live in Orlando, Florida. I did live in Philly for 12 years, and I moved down to Orlando, I guess that you do at a certain age in Florida. But I participated in their session a few months ago, and it was pretty dynamic because you had technology folks, and then you had the departmental folks. And as you watch these professionals facilitating the situation, you found there was this divergence. When we talked tech, the tech people all jumped around, had lots of creative ideas. And then when you talked about goals, the departments had goals and methods, but they're meeting them. So how are you facilitating that already? I think you've mentioned before that you're sort of trying to catalog everything that's going on. But where are you with that, and how's it going?
So the way we're framing the conversations on October 12th are really issues-based. And so things that you don't necessarily need to be a technologist for to understand. So we have topics around public safety, the opioid crisis. We're also going to be talking about affordable housing. So actually Emily Shapiro, I'll be pulling her in to do the same spiel with a few other of her colleagues to be talking about how taking sustainability and energy measures can actually provide efforts for inclusion and further those kinds of goals that city government often has. And so we're making sure that the challenges and the problems that city government is trying to solve be the driver for these conversations. And we're also bringing the technologists in who may have solutions or ideas or strategies on how to address these problems so that that gap can be filled.
20 years ago, I moved to Philly, and I ran a partnership between PECO and Adelphia Cable, and we actually built the first competitive fiber optic network here. Bell Atlantic was the company at the time. It's now morphed into, I guess, Verizon. But, you know, hitting the sustainability goals, I've heard so many smart folks, but what is the role in the network, or how does the city help facilitate sustainability? One of the examples, I know you have Big Belly deployed. And Big Belly now is looking at, in addition to the trash container, a second module where you can locate network gear. Are you looking at that sort of thing?
I mean, to answer it simply, yes, we are interested in understanding what that could look like for the city. I think for us, because we're the central IT department to the city, we see so many networks being built all the time. And so we also have been asking questions of what is already existing and how are we going to leverage the existing networks that are already in here. One of the main challenges, this goes back to how fundamentally important having really sound infrastructure is. Every time we need to build out a new network, whether it's installing in Big Bellies, it doesn't necessarily require you to dig up the streets, but all that connectivity, a lot of that requires us dig up the streets, and then build it back over again. That's actually not well coordinated right now. And so one of the things that I've heard from all my colleagues across different departments is if we could coordinate when these streets get dug up, and we could coordinate all the people who need to do work in a given area, that would help so much more. And even from a sustainability standpoint, there's so much less waste happening, and also dollars that would be saved if we were able to coordinate those efforts. But if we could look at solutions that don't require us to dig up the streets, those are certainly things that to us seem like more low-hanging fruit and would provide us the kind of capability and network support that the city could leverage for smart city applications.
So Philadelphia has, in your chart, you talk about connectivity as part of the overall plan. Believe it or not, these big bellies, one of the departments that's most happy in Atlanta, I was just there yesterday, and the deputy CIO presented, and he said one of the departments that's benefited the most from the implementation of these big bellies is the transportation department, because they roll the trucks less. Do you have any data on that? So in other words, the garbage trucks are not in the street as often blocking thoroughfares, right? So you have sustainability, but you also have other quality of life improvements, right?
So our streets department actually does also manage all our waste management. So it would be the same here. It would be the same here in Philadelphia that Carlton Williams, our commissioner for streets, would be overseeing any implementation that had to do with the big bellies or any sort of waste management initiatives. I actually don't know the exact data around that. I know that one of the things that we are working on is data hygiene, and so we do collect quite a bit of information, but how clean that data is and how usable and ready for analysis that data is, that's actually something that I know not just our city is challenged with, but a lot of large cities are dealing with right now. And all that back-end work is going to be necessary in order for us to start thinking about the data integration and the promise of all the analytics and machine learning that smart cities has promised us.
Well, Verizon had said, smart in their definition is the marriage of connectivity to the analytics and then some sort of application and device. 5G is around the corner. Are you counting on the cell phone companies with ubiquitous? I know Comcast is building out this tremendous LoRa-based network. Do you see a heterogeneous network, multiple providers, or how do how are you going to realize the promise of 5G, and where are you going to get the money?
Whoa, these are really hard-hitting questions. I think these are conversations that are going to need to be had. And so I think that first it's about getting all the stakeholders in the room. And so that includes all the diverse range of network providers to really think about, who is going to do what in this space. And each company kind of has their own angle. And as a city, we want to make sure that the city stays competitive on multiple levels. And so that also means making sure that we are picking the best solutions for our city. Certainly Comcast has made a tremendous amount of investment. We see them as a key stakeholder and partner in our city. We're also talking to Verizon, AT&T, and all the other network providers, and they all have different capacities and capabilities that we are interested in learning about.
Yeah, I asked you that question because I'm asking at all the events we do. And the reality is most cities are still struggling to figure out how does all these different types of networks, how do they best master those? And one of the ways it is happening, like in Atlanta, no secret, AT&T's got their smart cities team headquartered there. Well, you see a lot of innovation in Atlanta centered around AT&T's network. I was at your event with Comcast, and it seems to be a real good marriage here with their LoRa base. I was actually in San Francisco at your kickoff, and it was pretty impressive. So how do you correlate these, and how do you deal with, well, you're being nicer to Comcast, and we did this. You have a lot of politics. Is there a lot of, because obviously it's a large corporation.
We're friends with everyone, Peter.
Good.
Everyone's our friend.
Well, they're smart.
Yeah. So I think what really needs to happen, and what I hear from the companies, they're always asking, like, well, what do you want? We'll do it, whatever you want. I'm sure that's something that you guys have, a lot of you have said to your clients. And so the reason why we emphasize the road mapping process and the stakeholder engagement so much is because depending on who you talk to in isolation, they're going to have their own set of priorities. But because we are representing all the departments in city government and a wide range of stakeholders across the city, we want to make sure that we are targeting priorities that have the most amount of shared goals and activity that are happening. We see that's where the true opportunity is in the smart city, and we have to define those. But we haven't had those deep discussions yet. I think a lot of groundwork has had to be done in order to get all the stakeholders in the room together to discuss these things. But once the city is able to get behind, a list of priorities, I think that'll really clarify to any company, but in addition to the networking companies, exactly not only what to pitch, but where in the smart city ecosystem they will be the strongest in our city.
So I live in Orlando, and actually our mayor is an environmental engineer. So obviously we have a big focus on sustainability and beauty and aesthetics, and yet Orlando is known to be a very terrible city for the deployment of technology, right? So here are some of the innovations we talked about. Big Belly, but these are all cell networks here, right? So one of the big issues is how do we cooperate aesthetically in terms of the deployments to please the city and provide the right type of environment, all this beauty you're building out here. But is there a big vision there, or is that still something that's going to be developing? And the answer I've seen is it's developing.
Yeah, it's definitely developing, and the reason why, again, is because we don't want to be city government and say, here's what we think is the right answer. We actually very much transparently acknowledge that there's so much activity that's going outside of city government. And so the reason why I'm so excited about the startup community is because that's where I find a lot of the dreamers are. And so we want to engage all of you and folks from outside city government to really help us define what do we need to dream for our city. Whether it's bringing Amazon here and thinking about what that looks like, but even thinking beyond that. And so for us, the diverse range of perspectives is really critical to this conversation. And we also do want to take a step back. We don't want to be a city that's just throwing pilots left and right and then not knowing how to scale them appropriately. A lot of the pilots that are happening, they happen on vertical real estate, and so it's all about streetlight poles. Well, there's only so many streetlight poles you can put. And actually another challenge that we have is once we have these pilots, we have to sometimes we have to take the devices down, and that's more employees having to spend time to take these things down, whether because we can't scale it, or we weren't able to have a successful pilot, or whatever the reason may be. But these are all little things that actually add to the burden of why we need to be very careful about what we adopt, when we adopt it, and how much we're actually allowing for collaboration through these pilots. So I think the exciting thing about Smart City for us is that we want to identify, again, the priorities, but then also be able to bring in the right amount of collaboration so that not one department or one entity or one organization is leading it and leveraging it on their own, but actually that we're looking at multi-purpose applications, devices, and technology.
Well, I think that's the biggest light bulb for me is, if the departments break down the silos and they do cooperate, like I see in Atlanta, and then they help incent kind of group activities. Like Atlanta's Chamber of Commerce, there was a mobility quarterly meeting, and they had Coca-Cola, Georgia Pacific, showing up to talk about networks. Well, Coca-Cola has a person who's director of mobility, right? So they see this whole shift in the culture occurring. So, Philadelphia was the first free Wi-Fi test, right? It's a laboratory, right? It didn't work out because of bigger issues. So, how are you kind of tackling just providing, digital inclusion and broadband and all that good stuff?
So we actually have a pretty long history of leading in the digital inclusion space. Philadelphia has over 50 public computing centers called key spots. And so these are public access computing centers that are strategically located in low access neighborhoods. And we have a really wonderful group of community-based organizations that partner with us. Parks and Rec predominantly manages about half of those sites in their recreation facilities, and so there's a bit of investment going in there, and actually through the recent Comcast franchise agreement, there's a lot of upgrades that are going to be happening in that regard. But in addition to digital inclusion, I know somebody asked about workforce development and the changing nature. There have been quite a bit of conversations happening between the Office of Innovation Technology and our workforce development and talent development unit over at Commerce, and so we are deeply partnered with them in making sure they're understanding the trends that are coming up. How are we going to support our internal departments in getting ready for those changes? And actually, I'll give a shout out to the water department. I love a lot of the work that they're doing, specifically with their green stormwater program. And they have folks hired there who I consider civic hackers, people who are really tinkering with different types of devices on how we're monitoring the quality of our green stormwater infrastructure work that's happening here in the city. And so we're already, a lot of departments are already seating their units and their teams with folks who are already thinking differently and are trying to be more tech forward, tech savvy, but also more economical in their approach as well. And so I think in that regard, it's incremental, but these strategic partnerships do need to happen. And I'm getting the sign to.
Okay, well, I think we had a good discussion. Any time for questions, or we're good?
We're already.
We're good. All right.
Our
Thanks
folks
so
have been
much.
very patient, so I think a big round of applause for Peter and helping us the city of Philadelphia is focusing its energies on, and quite a bit of energy, we would say. Our final speaker, and yes, it's our final speaker, is the Chief Executive of the Internet of Things. Chief Executive, boy, would you want to be the Chief Executive of it?
Make it quick. Probably a lot of it's repetitive, but I'll take some questions definitely afterwards. So what is Machine Q? It's our new enterprise IoT business. We officially came out of the woodworks in October of last year, and we're launching throughout the country as we speak. You know, Ellen's seen this deck a few times. I'm sure other people, I've seen some other folks here. I sort of go back to sort of the importance of connecting things and how changing fundamentally what an object is when you just put a radio on and how it works. You can see the old mousetrap that hadn't changed much. They made it into a torture chamber somewhere in the middle of the 20s, it looks like. And then, you know, Victor and other folks, quite frankly, are working on a better mousetrap. And the thing is why? Why does that make a difference? Why is pest control, all the things we talked about, smart cities, changing the world, you know, AI, ML, all the buzzwords you can imagine. Why is this important? Well, it's amazing how just a few things change what an object essentially is. And so when we talk about, let's say, a mousetrap as an example, and we're talking to Fortune 500 companies that you could, chemical companies, I'll put it out there, that are building these systems for both termites, mice, rats throughout the whole, let's say, cities, urban, rural, etc. You know, you get into that conversation saying, okay, I'll put a radio chip on there, I'll put an actuator and a sensor on this device. Great, what do I do next? And if you think about all the litany of things that they want a web service, they need a database, they need security, they need encryption, they need authentication. You know, God forbid someone figures out that in a particular MDU development that there's a lot of mice, or at a hotel. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into this, quite frankly, that when you just add that radio chip, it sort of transforms everything. And so I put that up there, and if you haven't read the book, The Seventh Sense, it's a great book regarding sort of networking and what's happening in the world. So, again, you probably heard of this, Fourth Industrial Revolution, that's where we're at now. Why and how big numbers. I've seen McKinsey, Bain, yada yada. You know, I get sort of a headache when I look at these consulting reports. And I think, you know, what it comes down to, you hear the challenges everyone here had mentioned earlier today, how difficult it is to actually take this opportunity that's among us, in front of us, and actually make something of it. I mean, there's a lot of go-to-market strategies, there's financing, sort of, I think the tech, quite frankly, is there. I mean, I can get into sort of what we're doing in Verizon, AT&T. I just came back from Amsterdam last week and met with the heads of Liberty Global about their plans and what they're going to do sort of across the globe on this topic. But tech's there. I think, in fact, the technology is probably further ahead of the curve in the businesses and I'd say sort of the municipalities. The question is, how do we get that to change? So why now? Usual things, right? Cloud, affordable hardware, tools. You know, we're working with chipsets, by the way, in terms of, you know, I think Ellen mentioned the Nano Technology Center down the block. we're in pilot with certain enterprises, give you an example, where they're printing printable chipsets, printable radios, printable batteries, crystal oscillator, less than $2 bill of material is the goal. And that would be put onto a document, or it can be put onto anything. And as you get closer to sort of what does that mean, it's pretty transformative in terms of all the industries you can actually start changing when these devices get that small. So I think all those things are leading to sort of, the boom on this stuff. Some of the trends that we're thinking about, and we joined the Smart City Council, we're doing a lot with the city and their efforts to sort of, I think, embrace the future to the extent that we think that we can be valuable to them. But really just collect, communicate, crunch the numbers. I mean, it's really the same thing you guys have been hearing over and over again. A lot of good can come from, I think, having the right network, the right applications, the right devices out there. I think the holdup is how do you get there? I mean, Charlie spoke at, we had a Smart City event in May at the Franklin Institute, and I think it was loud and clear in a room of 500 executives from around the globe who were there. I mean, we're talking from Tata in India, and SK Telecom in Korea, and SoftBank in Japan, to Orange or KPN, all over the place. And I think everyone probably struggles with, well, if the municipalities don't have the money potentially, is what we hear, how do you make this happen? And I think that's where everyone needs to get a little more creative. Trends, everyone's going to cities, we get this, but I just put this up there. You can see a lot of opportunity. Solutions, water management. I think, in terms of this, we'll come out at the end of the year with an announcement with all of our initial partners, and there'll be a lot, and it'll be some of the larger water, let's say, players in the space. Just to name a few, these are some of them right now. They have all different devices. They're building specifically to the same protocols that we're building to. And we see literally, I mean, I've been on this journey about a couple years. About a year ago, we maybe a brand new device / web service, what I call full stack solution, pop up once a month, once every other week. We're seeing it almost daily. I mean, our labs are inundated with inbound solutions, which have, this entire, from module up through the, web service. Every other day now, we're getting something, if not every day. And we're certifying and making sure they work well with the network, and there's a burn down the network in this case, and make sure things are going well. But as you can imagine, the water is a big opportunity. Sustainability, again, smart lighting, irrigation, environmental monitoring, every day there's a new one out there. And our goal as Comcast is not to sort of pick and choose winners of which one of these solutions and these companies are the ones that we rep and warranty. I mean, there'll be some that we potentially think make the most sense for us. In this case, we're talking about smart cities, but we have a whole litany of solutions already for smart building, MDU management, leak detection, leak shutoff, like it goes on and on and on. And we happen to actually bundle those together with our Xfinity Communities, which is our MDU development plans, and we have 5 million customers in that base. So a lot of these things can be repurposed for B2B and not sort of business to municipality, and we're seeing that happen. Transportation, again, the usual suspects are out there building new devices. I think that, there's a lot out there, and I think we get caught up in a sort of a pilot quagmire often, not only of our enterprise partners, but also I think with some of the cities. And I think, how do you unlock this? How do you move away from just pilot, POC? I don't have the answer. I don't know whether anyone has that answer, quite frankly. At Comcast, we're actually thinking, I think, to be a little bit more creative. We're working with partners actually responding to RFIs, RFPs across the country, and having limited knowledge of sort of how cities work and who makes the decision. I think some of the challenges are that, meaning who are the decision makers. Someone mentioned the siloed world that we live in, where it's utilities, have different departments. They've been there for generations, and now you have smart CTOs, CIOs. These are relatively new positions in the context of the whole scheme of things. Who makes a decision? I mean, in a lot of ways, these are actually city-based decisions, but if you have a legacy of having different departments not communicating with each other, even us, we have 300 strong, let's say, government affairs executives throughout the country talking to mayors all the time. We're in DC, as you can imagine. Even we have a hard time understanding, well, how does an RFI and RFP go from this is a particular siloed solution for this one response, but how is that meaningful and how is that communicated across other parts of the city? I think these are the challenges, not just us, but other people are sort of establishing. And if you look at Verizon, AT&T, they're clearly a mobile network operator. They've been in sort of, I'd say, machine-to-machine IoT space longer than we have. There hasn't been a lot of success. I mean, for all the talk of, someone mentioned Atlanta, we obviously keep tabs on our competitors, and what's the end result? I haven't seen any large-scale smart city solution that's been rolled out. In many ways, some of the smart city solutions I see are sort of almost a Trojan horse for 5G assets. I've seen people put, connected light posts here or there, and that's great. They have, gigabit needs, machine learning. They can look at the plumes of a car device to see if there's emissions. I mean, I've seen the whiz bang. I've been to all the universities, and the reality is someone wants to just, put a light pole there, put an LED light, and then make sure that they don't pay for some sort of tower asset later. So I think there's a lot of figuring out where these markets are, and if anyone in this room has any ideas, I'd love to come talk to me afterwards. We'll definitely have a coffee over it. We built this business, quite frankly, because we think we have the right assets, the right relationships, and the right balance sheet to make sure that going forward for the next 50 years, that if you want an IoT network, Comcast will be there. And that's what we're doing. I think that's obviously, in many ways, has set us apart compared to some other players in the space, where there's a promise of sort of set and forget, put things in the ground, 10, 20-year relationships. The expectations are, if you're a startup or quite frankly someone who doesn't have a strong enough balance sheet, well, your product roadmap is longer than your balance sheet, your bank account. It's problematic for a lot of our partners. And so we see everyone from Fortune 50 companies right down to sort of smaller startups who want to work with us because, again, they feel a bit confident. They build on this, they'll build on quite a standard that not only us, but 500 global conglomerates are now working towards. And I think that's the interesting thing for us is we're constantly talking to startups, new businesses, et cetera. Even the big corporations that we're interacting with, I've yet to see a big corporation not outsource an element of this to some other third party. I mean, we have Fortune 50 customers in big industries, and they're dabbling. They don't have industrial design background, or industrial design, network engineering, software engineering, and hardware engineering in-house, problematic for them. So they go to a third-party startup oftentimes, or manufacturer they have a history with. And so I think those are the things that sort of are interesting, is to see how do you get these big companies to sort of move the ball forward. Connectivity options, the reason why we got this is because, again, the bottom right quadrant, local area networks, Comcast is excellent in that case in terms of broadband, Wi-Fi, Zigbee, Bluetooth, everything you have in your house or something, we'll get that. Cellular networks, Verizon, AT&T obviously are dominant there. Bottom right quadrant is where you start seeing a lot of the communications companies coming out with competitive technologies to solve for this. We have, this standard we've chosen. The others are building things that eventually would also compete as well. Some of the advantages of this technology, and again, all of these technologies, quite frankly, have the same advantages, and a lot of them have the same advantages. And I think it's, as I said, the technology's there, whether it's us with LoRaWAN, whether it's the inevitable NB-IoT launches in the future. There's nuances. I mean, we've had obviously conversations with some of our partners who partner with other communications companies, and so it's the unsexy elements of these businesses is when you have these aha moments, even for our engineering staff and our business thinking, where battery. I never thought that we would be spending so much time at Comcast thinking about battery supply and battery this and battery that, but it's actually very meaningful, not because it's about the cost of the battery per se, but it's the form factor. It's how long can that stay out there. If you're dealing with most of the IoT solutions offer some magical cost of ownership. This TCO is great. You don't have to go and check your meter. I heard somebody, like legacy AMR. Wonderful. What happens if one solution offers a better battery life where you don't have to have a turn of an install of a battery twice? It could be a 10-year device out in the field, but if you have to use a particular technology that requires 2 or 3 truck rolls, and trust us, we know about truck rolls, it blows it out of the water. So I think you don't want to have that truck roll. How do you limit it to 1 truck roll? And that sort of is pervasive around the whole industry. I mean, the total cost of ownership is what everyone offers in every IoT solution I've seen for the most part that's been successful. But again, it's the nitty detail. It's managing a network. It's making sure that, this is not Wi-Fi where you can just plug something in and plug it out, right? I mean, you have to make sure that if I promise you 5, 10, 15-year battery life of what you're doing, that let the network experts arguably make sure that the signals aren't being sort of erratic, aren't pinging, that, there's always, again, non-glamorous elements of the business is what makes this thing work. And I think, people get lost on the device and the application side, but it's in between is when you will get burned on sort of TCO that we've seen, and we've spoken to other partners globally. Here's Philadelphia, here's Comcast down on the right. So we have a network here, we have 100% coverage, we're building more, we're building in 15 cities, we'll probably announce more as well. And so we have a multi sort of nodal network topology. So we'll be macro, there'll be some strand, potentially CPE is what we're doing. We want to get as close as possible to the sensor. The reason why that's the case, again, most of these businesses who are coming to us, these global startups, they want to spend as little on the battery. They want to make sure the battery's out there. And quite frankly, again, the form factors are looking for don't work if you have to basically put a D battery or C battery, an A battery. They don't want that. And so if you have to traditionally send the bit up to a tower, which might be a kilometer away, that's problematic for them. They'd rather have that bit go down the block or sometimes even in the house. We can address those. How are we supporting, I think, smart city goals? So again, we're talking to a whole bunch of cities and replying to RFPs and RFIs with partners. We're not necessarily per se providing a particular solution. We're providing the underlying network, and we're hoping that all these ecosystem partners build to the same protocols, and the cities, quite frankly, should not be mired in picking and choosing protocol standards. They should go with one. We think that LoRaWAN will be here for many, many years, as other sort of comms companies have. Put that aside, let the professionals manage, we think, the network for them, and then let the world compete for the business. Let the best XYZ solution, which could be a solution being device right through web service, they should come to you and they should compete based on that, not the opposite way where we think, in the past we've seen proprietary networks sprout up and you have one network for this, one network for that, you might have 15 different radios running around the city. No, that's ridiculous, because then you're basically going to be stuck buying that same razor, because there's only one razor that fits that blade forever. We think that's a bad idea, and hence the LoRa Alliance also think that's a bad idea. So that's why we've sort of built the standard. And I think that's why we start seeing so many of these startups come to us, because they recognize that, listen, we want to compete on the other elements of this business, not compete on sort of locking someone into a network. As I mentioned, we're sort of always going through these in terms of the smart lighting project with Chicago. We launched San Francisco last week. We're actually, another thing that I think San Francisco does a great job with is they have like a startups to residence program with the Bay Area and San Francisco proper, and then also some of the other counties around there, where they get together city officials. The city officials sort of prioritize by department particular things they're looking to do, and they'll go have a conversation with the startups about, hey, listen, can you build for this? We also have a big venture arm and a private equity arm, and we always collaborate. And I think if you talk to our ventures folks, what's always worrisome here is that innovation doesn't happen when a startup is telling the world that I'm selling to government agencies or even big enterprises, right? These are long sales cycles. So how does a startup get funded, quite frankly, if they're building something for things that require multi-year contracts or multi-year negotiations? I think it's a problem. I don't know how anyone solves this issue. I mean, in terms of where that goes, the ones that we have that would probably partners who are most likely to interface with the cities would be the ones which are the Fortune 500 companies. They've been at this for a while. They're integrating with new solutions, and that's fine. But in terms of this, Cambrian, explosion of startups to help the smart city, my bet is that you'll have those folks focus on enterprise B2B plays, which can be repurposed quite nicely, probably for some municipal applications as well. Again, silos, we think this is ultimately some of the things that we see out there. I'd love to figure out how this thing changes over time. I think it's just a timing issue. And again, we're doing a lot of smart city hackathons. We did something with Orange in San Francisco at Mobile World Congress. We'll be at the DC conference next week. We're supporting some of the efforts that the city has with Penn going on. So we're making a collective effort to make sure that, hey, we're there. We'll be here, much like we are in the communities for 54 years. We'll be there with this pervasive IoT network, we think, for the next 50 years. And the more we can work closely with the city, understand what they want to do, I think the better off we'll be. Looking forward to sort of, hopefully, a way to resolve some of these issues of go-to-market, which I think all of us here have sort of talked about, which is being the situation that we're in. And that's it.
Wow. I first of all want to congratulate you for being here today, everyone in the audience. I want to thank all of our speakers, including Alex and the folks who had to squeeze quite a bit of information into a shorter time period. I hope today, certainly for all of you, was worthwhile in terms of learning, A, what smart cities are all about, B, how much work it is to actually make a smart city happen, and see where the city of Philadelphia is heading and what steps they're taking. I think those were sort of the three goals that we had this morning to accomplish. In about 4 or 5 days, Steve Davis and John Friedman get to join our company at Suez. We are roughly about 83,000 employees across the globe. And I was thinking about that term smart city, and I was thinking, well, how smart can a city be if they're not really focused on changing the world, changing their city from the attitude of making products, taking products and just disposing of them, instead of maybe looking at recycling, recovery, and then reusing. And what brought that to mind was because we really didn't have time to talk a little bit about water reuse with Steve when he was up here, because water reuse is certainly close to what we do in many parts of the world, in LA and certainly in the Middle East as well. And it's something that really is something that every city should be looking at, especially if we're going to consider themselves smart. So despite all the digitization, despite all the other types of things that cities are doing, and certainly the city of Philadelphia is doing, it's like in football, if you're not blocking and tackling, you're not doing the basics, and you're not looking at the ways that we need to block and tackle, then, how smart are we? So with that, lunch is served in the room across the hall.
Pulling fiber for the data collection, power. So, the one on the left, for example, they have to put the truck out in the middle of the roadway. So you have to actually interfere with traffic to some degree. So this wasn't just, let's throw a stake in the ground next to the curb. So there was real effort that had to go into this and consume city resources in terms of personnel time. As I said, we concentrate on Northeast Ann Arbor. If you're not familiar with Ann Arbor, as was mentioned, it's a city of about 115,000. It has what I call a beltway. It's surrounded by state highway and interstate. And the northeast part of town is where Umtree is located, and the College of Engineering and most of the universities right in the center. But we also have a major medical center there. So one of the working assumptions going in was anything we did had to pay its own way. And we had to be able to bring the money, not just for the equipment, but we needed to be able to fund the city personnel to do the installation. It was that simple. 2011, Michigan, like a lot of other states, maybe even worse, is recovering from the recession. And the city had downsized significantly in terms of the number of staff. So we had to pay our own way. And if we couldn't do that, it wasn't gonna work. As mentioned, equipment needed to be installed by city staff. I mean, reliability issues, but also, it was who has access to the cabinet, the traffic control cabinet on the corner. They're not just going to give away access to all those. Where somebody could muck up traffic flow in the city. But one really important thing was keeping the city employees, traffic engineers, engaged in the process. And this is, I think, a good lesson that if you are going to be engaging with a community, you try to engage at multiple levels. You just don't have the word come down from above that, oh, well, you're going to help make this work. Because I can tell you what will less likely happen, that the people that are out there working on the streets, the ones with the keys to the traffic control cabinets, they may just drag their feet. We needed to engage them and to have them understand why we were doing what we were doing, and have them be part of the process. As I mentioned, we couldn't interfere with normal operations. We cannot cause any significant disruption to traffic. And availability of personnel dictated when some of the equipment could be installed. So in Ann Arbor, 6 or 7 Saturdays out of the year, there's a big football game. And the city has to have employees out there helping to the university with traffic management. Well, and those people don't come. If they're working on Saturday, they don't work on Monday. So those are times, fall time is very difficult to get these additional efforts taken care of as opposed to the normal operating circumstances. We always assumed that this had to be a win-win situation. That may seem obvious, but I can tell you in speaking with a lot of other academics, it's not. And, you know, the academic has I've got the money, I have the technology, I can solve your problems. And sometimes they don't even know what the city's problems are, and whether or not the city has the resources, even if they have the will, whether they have the resources to accommodate. So we realized there had to be a win-win situation. They had to get the research done, but the community, and even more so than the city, the community had to benefit. So one of the things, the other lessons learned that I think made our deployment very successful, particularly in such a short period of time, is that we always engaged a third party, a trusted third party. We had a lot of testing that had to happen with this equipment. And again, it was all prototypes. We needed to make sure the city was comfortable that we weren't, A, creating a disturbance, and B, setting them out there to work on this equipment unnecessarily. So we engaged what was then Parsons Brinckerhoff, now WSP, because they were already familiar with the traffic management system within the city of Ann Arbor. They were a trusted third party. The city could listen and say, yeah, what the university's telling you is correct, or it's BS. We don't think that's going to work. So by having that third party was really critical in order to be able to move very rapidly. One other important thing that we did is shortly after the award, we invited, at the university's bill, 3 staff from the city to ITS World Congress in Orlando. This is not trying to placate these people. We wanted them to go down and see that there is an entire community that believes in what it is we're trying to actually deploy in their community. We wanted them to understand that this is not just some harebrained academic idea, but that there's actual movement behind it. I think that went a long way because they heard from others. It wasn't just hearing from me or a couple of my colleagues at the University of Michigan. You know, this was kind of blazing new trails. You know, there's obviously a lot of collaboration between the city of Ann Arbor and the University of Michigan, but not like this. You know, not working on traffic management, installing equipment, and tapping into the city's fiber network. If you've ever lived in a community, university community, other than when you're a student, because you don't think about that, but if you're a taxpayer, you realize there are always certain tensions going on between the university and the community. And the University of Michigan and the City of Ann Arbor are no different. Well, we had to overcome maybe some absence of trust in certain instances in order to make this work. Again, because we needed access to the city's network, that's a big deal. And so we had to engage not just traffic engineers, but the whole city's IT staff had to review the whole plan for doing this. Again, our third party was able to assist in that process. And then we had, the usual memorandums of understanding. The city was actually a subcontractor to the university, which is fairly unusual. We had to develop billing procedures that worked for the city as well as the university. The other point I want to make is, while we talk really primarily about the infrastructure, we also had to equip over 2,800 vehicles with this technology. And well, that didn't involve the city directly per se. We had a number of city vehicles. It involved the community. And so we had to get the community to rally behind us in order to be successful, because if we had all the equipment and the infrastructure, but we had no vehicles out there, we would have failed miserably. So it's not just about getting the city as an organization, it's about getting the community behind it. One of the things we did was, in the first couple of years, we actually gave participants money to allow us to install this equipment on their car. Money's nice, but Ann Arbor, particularly Northeast Ann Arbor, is fairly economically affluent. These people don't really need the money. So what we did is we created ways to help assist these participants to donate their money either to the Children's Hospital or to the public school system. Who's going to argue with helping sick kids or education? So that was one of the ways that we really engaged the community. We were able to get the research participants to let us muck around with their cars. When I say muck around, we had to put radios in the trunks, we had to run power from the OBD2 board, we had antennas to mount, and this in and of itself could have been a public relations nightmare. For weeks, maybe months, we constantly combing the internet to see if any one of our participants is complaining. We had some people thought, well, I think your system screwed up my car, and what do you do? Even though you know that our system didn't screw up their car, we paid for a lot of car repair bills because that was how we kept everything going. We kept the community engaged. After the initial 3 years, it was actually 30 months, was the original project, to develop and deploy. Then a shared division between the university and the city began to emerge. We continued to focus on connected and autonomous vehicles. But it really started to leverage the communication, the interaction that we had in the original program. We really wanted to capitalize on what had been successful. And I've had other colleagues in the university come to me and say, how did you manage to work like that with the city? And I have to say, it's not rocket science. It really isn't. We as academics need to treat the city like we want to be treated. They're the community. We live in that or work in that community. So more broadly now, we interact, collaborate on broader transportation mobility issues. City residents and the university, we share a lot in common, particularly in our city. Parking challenges, they're not mutually exclusive. There's parking challenges for the university, parking challenges for the city. There's some overlap. And so it required us to be a little more visionary, I would argue. A little more visionary than the typical academic city relationship. And we had to think longer term. We weren't talking short term. What's going to happen when I'm no longer with the university, when Craig's no longer with the city? How do we make sure that we maintain this channel and collaborative relationship? So some of the direct benefits, I'm not going to talk about the direct benefits to the university, more so I'll talk about the direct benefits to the community. So the city was able to obtain upgrades and some new equipment. So there was software upgrades to traffic management operating system. We actually paid to install some additional fiber in a few locations because it allowed us to get data from intersections where the city didn't currently have network installed. We upgraded or installed new traffic controllers in a number of locations. From the university's perspective and the city's perspective, we gained this massive amount of data. From a research perspective, dozens and dozens of research projects have been carried out using this data. But it also starts to give the city more of an insight of how their traffic operating system is working. I have to admit, we haven't done the best job of providing the data in a format the city can use, but we're working on that. Indirect benefits, new and exciting developments for the city and university staff, again, by keeping everybody in the city engaged and learning so they understand why they're doing what they're doing. I think is very important. We, especially, I would say, if you're an academic institution and you want to engage the community on connected vehicle technology, you better convince the guy that has the key to the traffic control cabinet, because if you don't convince him, you're dead in the water. It's that simple. Other indirect benefits, city and the university have gotten recognition for their innovation. And this particular project, Safety Mountain Deployment, is the direct outcome. One of the outcomes of it is MCity. And if you've not heard about MCity is a dedicated testing ground for connected and autonomous vehicle testing and development. It started out because I literally needed a 300-meter long, 2-lane, straight, level stretch of road that I could do some testing on. And then it turned into something much, much larger. And this is something that's actually being replicated all around the world. China, Korea, Japan, UK, Netherlands. As I mentioned early on, the partnership has really expanded, and we have funding to continue to do the connected vehicle deployment for another 4 years. But we're gone well beyond that. So the city and the university have teamed on writing proposals. Each of us has brought third parties to the table for conversations. We maintain regular meetings. Craig and I meet every other week, just so each is aware. And he and I become kind of the central conduit for the exchange of information as it relates to transportation in our community. We had one just, was it earlier this week, late last week, I don't remember. We also have another city personnel where we can have an exchange of information. Hey, this academic is doing research in this area, you might be interested in this. Hey, the city's working on something else. Hey, university, you might be interested. And I'm going to hand it over to Craig because I've done all the talking, so you should probably hear what Craig actually thinks.
When Jim talked about win-win situation, it has really truly been a win-win situation. For us, the positives are they have made investments in our infrastructure. Jim alluded to the fact that his university holds about 7 events a year in Ann Arbor, and they managed to put upwards of 110,000 people in one street corner, which is essentially doubling the size of our population. And we have to move all those people in and out of that venue. And with the investments that have been made, we are getting better at doing it. We are opening up new corridors where before we didn't have connected signals. That They've now helped to connect our signals so we can flush the traffic out of town faster. As he talked about before, the software upgrades, he has helped introduce different hardware to my staff. I have one staff member that on a particular brand of hardware said, "No way over my dead body are you ever going to put that in my system." We did. And as of about, was it about 6-8 weeks ago, that person came up to me and says, "You know, that's not a very good controller, but I had it in there for over a year, and it hasn't caused me one lick of problems, so it must be pretty good." Staff has learned about new technology. When Jim referred to the gentleman with the key to the traffic control cabin, the biggest supporter of connected vehicles and all the technology is one of my traffic control technicians. Has embraced it fully, plays with the software, working all the time with it. Cause new and renewed collaboration with federal and state, yes. As we go into one of our next phases of some infrastructure investment, we are probably looking at, not probably, we are looking at collaborating with the state DOT to coordinate some of our signals with some of their signals so we can move peak hour traffic in and out better. And it's just not adjacent signals, it's signals fairly far into our system. The project, while I can't prove this directly, the project has interested people in coming to work for the city. I've never had a PhD on staff before. I now have one in our traffic group. I gotta believe connected vehicles had something to do with that. Also, we are hearing from corporations and companies that want to be in Ann Arbor because of connected vehicles, either because they're in the business or they like, it's cool to be in a community that has connected vehicles. So we're starting to see that investment occur. It's not all roses. It's added maintenance. There are more bits and pieces and boxes inside the controller boxes. Those cabinets are getting crowded. And within the city, our biggest use of our IT, our fiber network, and we have a fairly robust fiber network. Our biggest customer carrying data on our network is Jim. He sets up a fairly large percentage of our fiber capacity. And I say that with smiling too, because as this project has moved forward, of our 157 traffic signals in town, I think we're down to 2 or 3 that are dumb signals that we don't have fiber to. One of them is right outside of his office. The traffic signal just down the block from him is as dumb as it can be. It has no communication. And I keep saying maybe you should invest in the fiber to get done. He hasn't done it yet. I'll do this. We're successful because we work at it. As Jim said, Jim and I meet personally every other week, generally on a Friday. We have to have that communication, even if there's nothing pressing to talk about, to keep each other apprised of what's going on. In fact, this morning, we had changed one of our technologies for vehicle sensing, and I guess we've never bothered to tell you about it until this morning. We were talking to a vendor, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're using your technology." And Jim sort of looked at me. So it's important that we have that communication. It has to be a win-win, and why it says we engaged in trusted third parties, that is correct. But the whole program, the partnership exists on trust. It is truly, we each have to trust each other that we're doing it for the stated reasons that we're doing it. There's not hidden agendas. When we do something, we're going to talk about it and figure out what the benefits and the downsides are. I don't know if you want to add any more to that.
No. Well stated.
Thank you, Greg. All right, so this is your moment. We want you to ask the tough questions. There are questions I know that are mechanical, like how did you go about this and that, but we also want to raise the bar above that. And use your microphones to respond. So please, first question, introduce yourself and your organization before the question.
Thank you. Jen T. Baker with the City of Tucson, Arizona. I am working with the Transportation Department, and we have a relationship established with our University of Arizona College of Engineering. Dr. Larry Head is working with us actively. I'm intrigued. We're in this time trying to figure out the best way to expand our fiber in our wireless comm and radio comm, all of that ecosystem. And when you indicated the IT network is loaded with this data, are there things that you're learning from that inform how to better build out the system so that you can accommodate the loads into the future?
Great question. Start with you, Jim, and then we'll go down the line.
Yeah, I think one of the things, realize that the initial deployment was a research project, and as academics, we wanted to collect everything. Whether you're going to use it or not, you got to collect it, because you never know. But what we have begun to learn is what we now need to collect. What can we lop off out on the edges of the network and only transmit, those things that we've now 5 years in come to realize we really need, as opposed to things we'd like to need. And so we can't, the city's fiber can't support us continuing to deploy across the city, which we're doing, and still occupy the same amount of fiber space.
And separate to this project, the city also has...
Louder for the back.
Separate from this project, the city also has on a different project worked at expanding the fiber we have and the fiber capacity, not driven by this project, but driven by future community needs. And the other thing that we found is when it comes through the city fiber, because of all of the security and everything that has to happen, they don't get it in real time. They have a need in some of their research now to do it real time, so they are now stripping some of the data off and using, I believe it's cellular.
Yeah, cellular.
Taking cellular to take it back to the researcher in near real time.
But originally, again, because we had to operate the government system, we use IPv6.
Louder for the back.
Okay. Originally, because we originally had to use IPv6, it had to be on fiber. We couldn't get other transmission modes to work.
So I'll interject. We've done research with a lot of cities about how they can solve this problem. European cities, Asian cities, and North American cities. And something we learned from the Canadians and the French particularly is that they have done rigorous asset inventories of all of their communications assets, privately owned, publicly owned, or hybrid. That's radio, that's cellular, that's non-cellular, mobile and wireless, that's fiber, and more. And dirty little secret of a lot of cities is there's a lot of dark fiber. Dirty little secret is lots of overlapping capacity that's not utilized or fully utilized. And that underutilized capacity is often inside an organization interested in the city's economic future, like a utility, like a university, like a hospital, or other anchor institutions, school systems. And that's a resource that the city government
facing this capacity challenge or other types of challenges, economic development driven, or maybe public safety driven, or maybe learning 24/7, 365 access to learning resources driven for adults and kids. These are resources that are often untapped because the city hasn't done an inventory and then hasn't created a partnership with the utility. We haven't heard these guys talk about the utility, but DTE has a lot of interesting assets and is responsive. They've been, for instance, upgrading their outdoor lights and using new LED technology from companies like Simcon and Itron. And those are assets because the utilities have built wireless networks to move data back and forth between the smart meter on the premises of the customer and the data center that collects that in order to be able to do things like demand management. So this is a really interesting resource opportunity. The scarcity is not the problem. The problem is partnering with those who own those capacities and negotiating with them access for free or low cost while they're ramping up. And very often they assume they're going to ramp up to utilize their capacity faster than they actually do. So you have more time than even the agreement generally permits. Just one option for Tucson. All right, so I'll ask a question while you're deciding what the next audience question is. And this question is really about the role of the US DOT. So as many of you know, US DOT wrote a $40 million check to the city of Columbus. And that was in the last months of the Obama years when the Secretary of Transportation concluded a competition that involved many hundreds of cities that were then winnowed down to a short list of, I believe, 70, and then there were 7 finalists, and then Columbus won. And Columbus has now leveraged that. There was a $10 million gift from Paul Allen.
80% federal money, 20% came from the state and the university. The second 3 years, they made us change the name. Another 3-year period where we're 2 years in, it was 50-50. So we had to come up with 50% of the funding to operate everything. Well, operate is a lot cheaper than deploy. So the total dollar amount is a lot smaller. But to date, we've spent over $50 million just on connected vehicle technology in the community. Now, after this year, the end of this year, we won't be getting any federal money, but we have funding, private funding, for the next 3 years. Again, it's a combination of expanding the deployment as well as maintaining the operation. And that's what the folks there are folks that are telling the university, this is what we need, and we're willing to pay for it. We just need you to do it.
So I will say about the federal role, there are now a growing number of conversations about who owns the data. And I'm going to come back with some questions to you about this because it touches on the city's role, the city's policies about data, and the companies that you're working with. But you have a question, give us your name, rank, and serial number first.
Yeah, sure. Pete Murray with Dense Networks. I'm the chair of the Network Infrastructure Task Force between the Smart City Council and the Wireless Industry Association. So I'm very interested in one, Intel said, 4 terabytes per autonomous vehicle per day. Have you, so it's a 2-part question. One is, what kind of data are you generating from the vehicles? What's it require? And then 2, do you think wireless and 5G is going to displace the need for some of the fiber and maybe lower your cost of operating?
So how are we going to manage this? The first part was how are we going to manage the data? Well, nobody needs to collect all that data in a deployment. From a research perspective, you want all of that data. Again, it's what you want versus what you really need. And that's not an easy question to answer. But nobody's going to save all that data. Nobody needs to. You might need to save the last 30 seconds prior to some incident, but you don't need to save everything that's going to ultimately be produced on board a vehicle. Part of the challenge is figuring out what data it is you need, and and basically parsing out that which you don't, just let it go off into the ether, and only bringing backhauling that data that is really truly important to your research question or your management of traffic, or relative to the cellular, I'm technology agnostic. I don't care what technology is working. What I know is when we had to launch in 2012, cellular could not, nor could cable support IPv6. Just we paid both industries a lot of money to try to get IPv6 working for some satellite locations, and now it may be the case that works now. Do I think that there's a role for cellular, whether it's 4G, LTE, or 5G? Absolutely. It's like you pick the right technology for whatever the problem is you're trying to solve. It's not a one-size-fits-all. One thing I will say is, and I believe this, go to the map and everybody wants to argue about it, but you will not have wide-scale autonomous vehicle deployment without connectivity. You can't do it. You can't manage the traffic. Otherwise, you've got a bunch of individual autonomous vehicles out there all trying to optimize for themselves. So, we might be working with DSRC right now, but we're also talking about, cellular, and as well as other technologies.
So some of you may have heard about the Denmark Outdoor Lighting Laboratory, DAL, in Copenhagen, which is making an effort for those companies who are experimenting with outdoor lighting, particularly intelligent, connected outdoor lighting, Internet of Things technologies, and the like. They have 135 companies who have paid to be in that environment, to do their install, to do their testing. How far are we from the point in time where you're going to be making a menu of fee schedule available to companies who want to come and deploy the outdoor advertising that connects to the vehicle, or the public safety devices that reduce contact between bikes and human pedestrians and cars, or any number of other technology innovators who want to use your services to help them not just do engineering and research and testing and validation, but maybe also show it off to the many people who are going to be coming to Ann Arbor for the purpose of learning about who's doing what and the innovators they need to learn about. When do we get a fee schedule?
As far as I'm concerned, we don't charge.
I know that's the now. I'm just saying, since you talked about money disappearing from the federal government.
Other than what it might require for like my staff to facilitate, it was funded with public funds, and we have and we facilitate. I've had to do all kinds of things. There was one location that one automotive manufacturer wanted to test at, and there was no really good, clear line of sight. And so they wanted to park their car during the day in this bank parking lot. Well, the bank didn't know this, and they were parking there. And the bank called the cops on it multiple times. And just before the cops got there, the car would drive away. So I've actually brokered, within the community for companies who want to come in and use the facility.
So is it your view that the city just is allergic to the idea of selling a service offering to companies who want to come, and that this, because it's public funds that put this in place, that there shouldn't be a fee-for-services schedule presented at some period of time?
Well, I can't speak for the city. I can just speak from the university as a state institution.
It's a rare city that doesn't want a new revenue stream, is what I'm driving at.
Yes, and that is a question we are wrestling with, as to how do you do that and do it in an equitable and fair manner to open it up for all parties. Not saying it won't happen, we just do not have that framework and structure that would allow it. It's a question we have with if we have excess fiber capacities. Company XYZ wants to jump on our fiber. But how do you do that? Sale, lease, whatever you want to term, in a fair and equitable and open manner that all parties have an equal opportunity to take advantage.
We spent a lot of time with the Danes building a solution. The Danes are very equity, fairness minded, so take a look at the Denmark Outdoor Lighting Lab website for some of what we built there. It's been really more successful than anybody expected.
So I also want to acknowledge, when we talk about the university-city relationship, it really is the university-community relationship. And I didn't know she was going to be here, but I want to acknowledge Michelle Mueller from Washington Community College. Because that is just, another way that, the University of Michigan has reached out to the community, because it's not all about people with, 4-year engineering degrees. So where's the workforce going to come from? So we started early on, in 2012, 2013, loading connected vehicle equipment to the community college so that they could start to train some of their students on this technology. And they've just kind of gone nuts. They're doing all kinds of stuff now that I didn't even know Michelle was going to be here, but she updated me on last night. Michelle, do you want to say?
Well,
Reintroduce yourself for those who missed it.
I'm Michelle Mueller, the Vice President of Economic and Community Development at Washington Community College in Ann Arbor. And basically, we recognize the fact that the #1 issue for business and industry right now, obviously, is talent. And talent at all different levels. And it can't just be about those that are coming from the university, it's also those that are looking for living wage occupations. And so the opportunity to partner with the University of Michigan on something that was really disruptive, not only for the automobile industry, but for every industry because of technology. And looking at all things, whether it be education, whether it be the automobile industry, whatever it may be, looking at things from a systemic, a systems thinking point of view. I mean, this is having major impact on the world, on everything that we do and how we're going to move into the future. So certainly, partnering with Michigan and working on grants and opportunities with business and industry to help develop those skill sets for the future workforce is really important to us, and this is a great way